Okay, so for those who are still here, thank you for having spent the afternoon with us. Some had to leave already. I hope it was an interesting afternoon. We just had a policy session where we were told that some of the issues that we discussed to tackle in an hour could not be tackled in another meeting that took 2 days, so that's kind of comforting. But I hope some ideas came up that we can follow through and follow up a little bit. Let's hear perhaps brief summaries from our co-investigators of the project who convened the workshops, and maybe just a few points that came up in your workshops, a few ideas, a few things to share. Who wants to start? Lena,
yeah, okay.
With the civil society workshop?
Being nominated there. Yeah, we talked in our civil society workshop, I suppose. It was quite a big group, most of you here were there. So, but it's, I think we tried to think about particularly how we engage activists who are not involved in digital rights or technology issues, get them involved in questions around surveillance. So we had a discussion about both some of the challenges around doing that, but also I think some optimistic thoughts around the fact that actually interest in things like crypto parties and using encryption tools through that type of training has actually increased quite a lot since the Snowden leaks, and we had people who felt had experiences of that. So there might be actually an increase in interests amongst activists to use these types of tools, but still there are some challenges to make this sustainable over time, I think was one of the issues around this, particularly considering the restriction on time and resources that activists often already have, then trying to also incorporate technological solutions to surveillance might be an added sort of stress for activists, or added work for them, really. So how to overcome that, which might be something to do with the usability of the technology as well. But then more broadly, I think we also discussed questions around how we might think about surveillance as in broader ways that doesn't necessarily just speak to technological responses or technological issues, but questions more broadly about the functioning of democracy and the implications of surveillance in society and the sort of the technological processes, the implications that this has for society more broadly, which would also speak then not just to activists but to citizens in general, that we might be able to articulate some of the harms of surveillance in terms that resonates more broadly with citizens, and probably that's the task at hand more than anything.
All right. Let's go through. Do you want to add something very briefly?
No. Talk about my session.
Well, let's continue with the one on journalism and media, which took place at the same time, and then let's go to the second spot. So, Karen, please.
Well, we focused really on discussing the challenges of covering surveillance for journalists, and also some possible recommendations for ways of going about addressing those challenges. And some of the key challenges, in addition to the ones that came up in our research, included the fact that the coverage has tended to be very personalized, so a lot of it is focused on Snowden as a figure rather than on the more substantive issues around surveillance. Also, it tends to be very event-driven, and it tends to not provide so much kind of contextual information, which is kind of a broader problem of media coverage, but it's particularly a problem in terms of understanding this story. And obviously also the complexity of the story is a key challenge for journalists, because a lot of journalists just don't have a lot of time on their hands to become specialists in covering this kind of topic. So these were some of the main kind of challenges that we identified. Then we talked about what are some ways of overcoming this, and what could we maybe do as academics as well. So first of all, one thing that we talked about a little bit was that perhaps data journalism could be used more effectively, as it has been elsewhere, in terms of actually visualizing what does mass surveillance mean, and that perhaps there's a way of kind of personalizing or making more concrete these practices of mass surveillance. And again, I think that links very closely with the kind of things you were talking about in your workshop, that basically at the moment it's so incomprehensible, both for journalists and perhaps also, as some people in our workshop suggested, even for politicians, and as well for citizens. So journalists need to develop tools to actually tell this story in a way that's more understandable by members of the public. And then the final very big point that we made has to do with accountability. And basically, this is a very consistent finding in our research, which demonstrates that one of the more kind of consistent critical ways of looking at surveillance is to actually call for accountability. So we thought about, well, what does it mean to maybe put journalists in a position where they are very vigorous about holding intelligence services to account, and maybe, in fact, one point that came up, several people talked about, was that we don't actually see a lot of evidence-based discussion and examples of successful acts of surveillance. So we don't actually know whether the things that the intelligence services are doing are working and what's not working. So we would like to see more evidence-based reporting, which again is something that could perhaps be made into an engaging story, and also understand what the limits are of surveillance as well. And then finally, some of us thought that perhaps there are in fact academics who are experts who would be able to actually intervene into the public debate. A lot of people in this room are doing so already. What can we think about making that work more effectively? So those were some of the key kinds of points that we covered in our workshop.
Great. So these were the workshops in the first slot, and the first parallel workshops, and then we had a second slot later in the afternoon with policy and technology. Ian, do you want to say a few thoughts and reflections on the policy workshop?
I'm just thinking that we did talk about a lot of different aspects of the policy debate, mostly focused on legislation and the parliamentary process, although as I said, I do sometimes despair of that, having worked on it for 20 years myself, of how much impact you can ever have as civil society groups in persuading particularly members of parliament, who by and large find this a very difficult area to understand, as does everyone. That's not to say, not to blame them for that, and that legislation is only law, or is only one mechanism of governance online, and that actually, one of the ways I think one of several ways this project has nicely worked together, sort of cross-fertilizing across these different areas, is that technical standards and code are another very important mechanism of online governance. And I think, in one sense, Michael's work in this project is more long-term than the policy stream, because as people observed this afternoon, given Brexit, it's really very hard indeed, even for people who are full-time political analysts and lobbyists, as one of the people in the discussion is and said, to know where things will go next, what politicians will be in government next week, never mind what they might be willing to trade off, where you might get small gains against small wins, because that's all you ever tend to get in terms in lobbying against very powerful voices within government of the national security establishment. And if you don't know whether the UK will be part of the European Convention on Human Rights in a year's time, never mind the European Union, then it's very difficult to see what the limits will be on already very broad powers. Most of the arguments trying to constrain UK government surveillance are focused on the European Convention on Human Rights. And so really, apart from the cost concerns that we also discussed for technology companies, which, as other people pointed out, the government usually effectively in the past has bought off technology companies by willing to cover their costs and more of data retention and of access to those records, it's difficult to know what will constrain the police, apart from more use of encryption. As somebody else observed, and I think this is sadly true, I've heard many other people say this in other contexts as well, the national security agencies in the end will do what they like. I don't mean that they are massively breaking the law, they just very effectively ensure the law, especially as concerns their activities outside the UK, is broad enough and flexible enough for them to do what they think is, I'm sure they honestly believe, necessary to protect national security and counter-terrorism.
And Michael, reflections on the tech workshop.
I'm bitterly disappointed to hear that you're relying on technology for the solution. We had quite a pessimistic conversation, I think, about the potential for integrating human rights into technical standards, and I think that immediately brings us into the same kind of questions that are being talked about now in internet governance, to do with the extent to which national governments and other stakeholders can kind of contest these universal, proclamations that are made by technical organisations and by the people operating the infrastructure, and how much say those different stakeholders should have in how those technologies are produced and governed. One possible chink of light in that was the idea that by gradually increasing the number of people within the standards organisations who have broader perspectives, we influence the consensuses that are reached, and also by alerting the people who are already within those organisations to the political issues that their work touches upon, we potentially sort of broaden the base of support for human rights concerns within those organisations. But I think that from our research, it seems that's going to very much depend on which organisations we're talking about, and there's a limit to how much the IETF can solve the whole social problem of surveillance. It doesn't even have all of the technological solution within its reach. We also talked about potential future developments for privacy-enhancing technologies and how to understand the needs of the general public and the needs of activist groups when it comes to issues like privacy. I think that's still a huge open question. We really need some, not just training and information about encryption and surveillance to kind of fly in one direction from the technologists to activists, but we really need information to come in the other direction, and for technologists to understand what it is that activists want to do and what it is that members of the public want to do in terms that technologists can actualise. I don't really see those conversations happening at crypto parties and so on. It seems very much like a one-way movement. So I think we've got a lot of the people in this room that we need to start to make a start on solving that, but where we go from here, I'm not sure.
I mean, one of the debates probably in our project and also in some of the workshops today has been the old debate of technical solutions versus addressing surveillance in broader context. Some people in the policy workshop, for example, mentioned questions of discrimination and other policy areas that relate very much to surveillance, but not so much to the technical aspects that might also offer interesting avenues for further engagement. And so these broader questions were certainly also reflected, I think, in the discussions today, but also in our project. It was something that we tried a little bit with this project, certainly, is to bring these different debates together. Of course, all this happens in the broader context of lots of events and discussions and all kinds of ongoing stuff around Snowden and around surveillance and so on. But what we try to do is to kind of create a little bit of communication and intersection between the different debates on the technological side and the policy side, on the activist side and the media side and so on. And I hope we kind of contributed a little bit to that discussion. Now, of course, the question, as always, is where do we go from here? Apart from the pub, which will come in a moment, but like, where do we go from here in other ways? What do we do now? Probably we all have ideas of what to do. I'm just maybe, would just like to ask if there are any 2 or 3 points that come up, quick ideas. Our panel here in front, what would you say? What would your idea be?
Mine would be political. This is everyone here knows that, but if you're not a member of a campaigning group already, like I know the Open Rights Group best because I'm on its advisory board, but one of those grassroots organisations, If you're working for a campaigning group yourself and your campaigning group is not addressing these issues internally, then reach out to others and think about doing that.
I don't know what next, but I mean, we have we were trying to start this list of to set up some kind of people who are interested in staying in touch and having some kind of network, which is always very popular to set up. This is, maybe we could pass this round for people to sign up, and we can try and summarize also stuff from today's events for that. But
if you didn't get a ticket via Eventbrite, because you can email people, can't you?
Yeah.
On
I think
who did that?
You can just get a list of the emails.
Yeah.
I think,
Yeah.
Joe had a spreadsheet of them.
Yeah.
Well, the big, loud and clear message from our workshop was that one of the things that we can do is to demand accountability and more accountability. It seems that things like straightforward calls to, let's say, limit surveillance or stop mass surveillance, that these might be very difficult to make, but that there's a broad sense that intelligence services and policymakers as well can be more accountable and more transparent about practices of mass surveillance and how they affect everyone. So this is a debate I think that we can all contribute to meaningfully.
What I would love to see is more people getting involved in the bodies that produce technology, but also there's a lot of development in this space going on outside of the ITF and things like that on a very ad hoc basis. There are a lot of people just kind of working away on tools or whatever without much sense of direction. What I would love to see is a kind of reverse crypto party where activists inform people working on technology about what they need.
Yeah.
I think that would be tremendously valuable, and I think actually most of the technologists I know would really welcome that because they want to put the work in, but they don't necessarily know, we don't necessarily know what to work on.
Any further thoughts from anyone? Anything you want to raise? Yes, one, two.
Just directly in relation to that last point. In the UK, there's a massive push on the coding agenda. So kind of a generation of kids who are kind of getting into coding. I just wonder, in terms of kind of encryption-based technologies and understanding going on more like the nuts and bolts, is there a way for us to kind of to enter that conversation, to enter that discourse, and to pull the control of technologies kind of back in a politically preferable direction? I don't expect an answer to that, but it seems like an opportunity there.
I was studying at the university the physics environment, where I launched campaigns at the time to stop people going to the armaments industry. So I think that trying to stop the CSP needs to recruit thousands of geeks in the next year. They've been giving video, something like that, so that would be actually.
Who does, sorry?
The DCSQ, they receive like 1 or 2 billion across the double up the number of people working with us. So in universities, mathematics departments, to say DCSQ is not an honorable career.
Yeah.
And actually, the professional societies for computer scientists, and we're sitting in one for engineers, do have, like the British Computer Society, which I'm a member of. They audit all British universities' computer science degrees, and they've got those degrees have to include a course on ethics if they're going to be approved. So that's, for the computer scientists among you, join the BCS and try to persuade them to put more emphasis on these issues.
Sarek?
One thing that came out of the workshop in engaging civil society was the importance of case studies, not just around digital surveillance, but around how it affects democracy, police surveillance and targeted surveillance, that affects democracy and civil society. And just thought, it'd be a great project if somebody was able to actually relate that into a book or something.
or a website, like a case study sort of scenario setting website. Yeah, this is something we talked about as well. Yeah.
But actually, you were talking about the push for coding, and I think it's almost something we see like very early on now. There's an interest in like teaching kids, even at primary school level, how to code, and people are realizing that this is important. And I think there's a question as well, is that how we could integrate maybe information security as well, just so that even very early on, kids understand that like having strong password and the security of communication is not not a given.
That's a really good point about coding, because I work in school and I do some coding initiatives, and it's really interesting. I hadn't thought of it before, but hacking and encryption were heroic. And we got the guys to bring the Enigma machine out, and they were showing the 3rd and 4th graders how it worked, and they showed the 7th and 8th graders how it worked. And the kids were clapping. You guys were hackers. You know, so that's really brilliant. That's good. Great idea. Love that.
Other thoughts, final comments?
Something we forgot to discuss that I think that after the killing of the UMP, it is likely that there's going to be a push on domestic extremism of the far right. I think it's going to be quite tempting for people on the left to say, yeah, certainly right. But I think it's going to be quite important to keep an eye on the wider impact, you know, the area of accepting a terrorism discourse and surveillance and things like that. Is something I think we need to keep an eye on.
Political context? This.
You guys not going to win an award for impact with this project? This is exactly what the ESRC wants, right? Don't be shy. I mean, seriously, they should give you an award.
I believe they should. You're totally right.
What impact have we had, though? Quite honestly, I mean, I'm just asking.
That's the question. That's it. That's it. If we stop the IP bill, then let's talk about that.
If we're wrapping up, though, I think just on that point, we haven't actually, the PI doesn't often get much credit sort of thing, so we should maybe take a moment. This project is coming to an end, and just to thank Arne, who's been running this project for the past 18 months, keeping us on track and so forth, which I know hasn't been an easy task. Also organizing events as well as the conference almost single-handedly last year. So thanks Arne, and also Joe Cable, who hasn't really been mentioned yet, who's been our research associate on the project as well, for their great efforts in this regard.
Yes, and of course the investigators who did the actual research and everybody else. Yes, so with this I think we can close today, and we will obviously try to write something up about today, put it up on our website, be in touch with all of you, but also keep checking our website. We are working on the broader, more fundamental outcomes in terms of academic work and so on. That is ongoing, and hopefully we can also publish some of that on the website pretty soon. Although not too, but like within months or so. Yes, and I think that's basically it for now. We will be in touch with you. If you haven't signed up on Eventbrite, make sure we have your name and your email on the list that Lena has there. And what is left then perhaps is with a more immediate question: where do we go? Is there a proposal for anybody who really doesn't want to go home right now?
There's if you go out the front door and go right and right, there's a pub called the Westminster Arms.
Okay, that sounds good. Okay,
now you're mixing it up.
Yeah, let's do the pub instead. Yeah, thanks to everybody who stayed until the very end and who came, and in times when people are discussing other things. But I think it's important to keep discussing these issues also. And as we've seen also in our policy workshop, we don't know what's happening now with the political situation here, but there might also be opportunities for interesting new developments that might not have happened otherwise. So it will be interesting to pursue this further. Thanks a lot, and see you in the pub.